the typical example of laziness!
A Tuesday morning in downtown Boston. The kind of cold that doesn't ask permission. It just walks straight through your coat and sets up residence in your chest. 41 people sit in a glass-walled conference room on the 22nd floor of Meridian Tech Solutions. The skyline glitters behind them. Coffee cups steam on the long table. Everyone looks comfortable. Comfort in that room was always borrowed. Vanessa Hart stands at the head of the table in a white blazer that costs more than most people's monthly rent. Her assistant, a thin, nervous man named Elliot Crane, holds a tablet with both hands like it might escape. The quarterly numbers sit on a projector screen, mostly green, one stubborn red column that everyone is pretending not to notice. Then Vanessa's eyes find Daniel Pruitt in the back of the room. She stops mid-sentence. A slow smile spreads across her face. Not the warm kind. The kind that knows it has an audience and has already decided what to do with it. Daniel. Her voice drops just low enough that everyone leans in. Stand up for me, would you? Daniel sets down his coffee. He stands. 6'1", broad-shouldered, heavier than most men in that room, warm brown eyes behind thick glasses. The look on his face is a look a man wears when he already knows what's coming but has nowhere to go. That specific stillness of someone who's been here before and learned that reacting only makes it worse. Vanessa tilts her head. Everybody look at this man. She gestures at him like he's an exhibit at a museum nobody paid to enter. If laziness had a face, it would look exactly like that. The room exploded. Not everyone laughed, but enough did. Nervous laughs, surprise laughs, the kind that escape people when they're afraid of whoever's holding the microphone. Elliot Crane buried his face behind his tablet. Priya Osei from marketing looked at the table and pressed her lips together hard. Raymond Cho, Senior Director of Engineering, Daniel's direct superior. 6 years of shared lunches and covered deadlines between them. Chuckled into his fist and looked deliberately away. Daniel didn't move. He absorbed it the way a building absorbs an impact. Something cracks inside. Nothing shows outside. What nobody in that room knew. What Vanessa Hart, in her expensive blazer and board-approved confidence, could not have imagined was that the man she just turned into a punchline was sitting on something worth $3 billion. And she had about 6 weeks before she found out the hard way. But here's what this story is really about. It is not about how Daniel won. It is about how many times he almost didn't. Let me tell you who Daniel Pruitt really was before any of this happened. He grew up in Akron, Ohio. Middle child of 3. His father, Lionel, worked double shifts at a logistics warehouse and came home smelling like engine oil and quiet dignity. His mother, Beverly, taught 3rd grade and made a sweet potato pie that people invented reasons to visit for. They weren't poor. They weren't comfortable. They lived in the specific space between those two things. The space where you learn early that nothing arrives without work and nothing stays without protecting it. Daniel was a kid who dismantled a family television at 11 just to see what lived inside it, then put every piece back before dinner. He stayed up past midnight at 16, not sneaking anything, just reading. Circuits, thermodynamics, systems theory, a flashlight under his covers so he wouldn't wake his brothers. College came on a partial scholarship to Case Western. He ate cheap. He slept less than was healthy. He graduated without debt, which his family was treated as something close to a miracle. He was never the thinnest man in any room. He had never been. There was an entire filing cabinet of comments about his body stored somewhere deep inside him. Coaches, classmates. A cruel uncle who confused honesty with cruelty and never understood the difference. He had learned to keep that cabinet locked, to carry the weight of other people's opinions without letting it slow his actual feet. He came to Meridian 8 years ago. Mid-level hardware engineer. Smart, quiet, reliable. The kind of employee who arrives early, leaves late, and never performs either fact for an audience. Vanessa Hart had been CEO for 5 of those 8 years. Now here's the thing about Vanessa that this story requires you to understand. She was not always like this. There's a photograph, sitting in a box in her Cambridge storage unit, not on any wall, of a 26-year-old woman at a startup pitch competition in San Francisco. She is standing at a whiteboard in jeans and a ponytail, laughing at something, her eyes bright in the way that eyes are bright before the industry gets to them. She grew up in Lansing, Michigan. Father left when she was 9. Mother worked 2 jobs and made it look manageable, which it was not. Vanessa had watched her mother be the smartest person in every room she entered and get passed over, repeatedly and without apology. For people who were louder and less qualified and happened to be men, she decided, at an age too young for the decision to be fully formed, that she would never be passed over. And she wasn't. She was brilliant in the specific way that certain people are brilliant. She could read a room, shift a narrative, and make hard decisions without the inconvenience of guilt. She grew Meridian's revenue by 40%, landed 3 federal contracts her predecessors had failed to close for years. The board adored her. But somewhere between San Francisco and Boston, between the ponytail and the white blazer, something had hardened inside Vanessa Hart. The hunger that once pushed her forward had turned inward. It had become something else. A permanent surveillance of threats, a reflex that converted other people's strengths into risks that needed managing before they could become problems. She didn't see Daniel Pruitt as a threat. She saw him as furniture, safely ignorable. The kind of quiet, heavy, unglamorous presence that powerful rooms use as background. That was the most expensive mistake she ever made. For 3 years of lunch breaks and weekends and late nights in a rented storage unit in Somerville with bad lighting and a rattling space heater. Daniel had been building something he called Project Halcyon. The concept at its core was elegant. Every major tech company in the country was hemorrhaging millions annually to energy inefficiency in their data centers. Cooling systems and processing loads running parallel, but never in conversation. Like 2 musicians playing in the same room without listening to each other. Daniel built the bridge between them. A proprietary adaptive thermal routing system that could reduce data center energy consumption by 60%. Not 60. In an industry where 1% improvement earned a press release, 60% was the kind of number that makes attorneys nervous and rivals sleepless. He had documented everything, dated every file, filed a preliminary patent in his own name 18 months before he showed it to anyone at Meridian, had 3 external engineers review the prototype under signed NDAs. His paper trail was clean enough to build a courthouse on. He had done everything right, which is a particular cruelty of what came next, that all that caution, all that precision didn't protect him. It just made the betrayal more expensive for the people who committed it. He brought it to Raymond's show on a Thursday afternoon in February. Raymond was the one person inside that building Daniel genuinely trusted. 6 years. Shared lunches, shared deadlines, late nights fixing each other's presentations. The kind of closeness that blurs into something that feels like friendship, because you survive enough together that the line stops matching. Raymond sat across from him in a small conference room with a broken ceiling tile. He reviewed the proposal, pulled off his glasses and cleaned them slowly, the thing he always did when he was working to contain his own excitement. "This is real," Raymond said quietly. "It's real," Daniel said. "You can prove all of this?" "I've been proving it for 3 years." Raymond looked at him. "Let me present it to Vanessa." Daniel nodded. "I'll build the deck." "No." Raymond's voice was careful, gentle, reasonable. "You know how she is with people she hasn't warmed up to. Let me set it up right. Get her bought in before she knows it's yours. You know, I'll make sure your name is on everything." Daniel hesitated. 6 years. Raymond had been at Daniel's mother's birthday dinner when she visited last spring. He had held things for Daniel before. He always gave them back. He handed Raymond the full project file. That was the last time Daniel Pruitt felt completely safe inside that building. What Daniel didn't know was what was happening on the other side of that trust. Raymond Cho was afraid. 8 months earlier, Vanessa had called Raymond into her office and placed a single document on her desk. A performance review from 2 years prior that Raymond had quietly falsified to protect a struggling junior engineer on his team. A small thing. A kind thing, honestly. But a falsified company document with Raymond's signature. Vanessa had looked at him across that desk and said nothing for 30 full seconds. Then, "I need you to be useful to me, Raymond. And I need to know you understand what that means." He understood. He had been living inside that understanding ever since. Small concessions growing into larger ones. Each compromised a step lower on a staircase. He hadn't noticed he was descending. By the time he handed Vanessa Daniels' project files, he had told himself so many times that it was survival that he had nearly stopped hearing the other word for it: betrayal. 3 weeks after Raymond took the files, Daniel was walking past the executive wing when he heard his own words coming to the boardroom wall. He stopped. His own phrases. Constructions he had spent weeks crafting. Adaptive cascade priority sequencing, a term he had invented, that existed nowhere in any engineering literature before he wrote it. Coming out of the boardroom speakers in Vanessa Hart's voice. He looked through the narrow glass panel on the door. 15 board members around the long table. Vanessa commanding the room. And on the screen behind her, a slide deck titled Project Halcyon, a Meridian Innovation Initiative, presented by Vanessa Hart, CEO. One name on the slide, not his. Daniel stood in that hallway for 45 seconds without moving, his brain running the same information in a loop, searching for an exit that did not exist. Then he walked back to his desk, sat down, and stared at his monitor while the cursor blinked at him like a question he already knew the answer to. He went to HR. Darlene Vogel listened for 11 minutes, folded her hands, and told him that intellectual property claims of this nature were handled through legal, not HR, and that she would need to document their conversation per company policy. She did not look at him when she said it. He went to legal. Foster Webb, cufflinks, framed senator photo, told him that without a formally approved patent, any work developed within the scope of his employment was potentially subject to Meridian's IP clauses in his contract. Even if I build on my own time, with my own equipment. Foster smiled the way adults smile at children who have made correct observations about rules that will be ignored anyway. It's complicated. He emailed Raymond, "We need to talk." Raymond replied 3 hours later, "Slammed this week. Maybe Friday?" That weekend, Daniel drove out to Framingham to sit at his brother Wendell's kitchen table. Wendell coached high school football and believed that most crises could be partially addressed by feeding the person having them first. He made Daniel eat a full plate of rice and beans before saying a word. Then he sat across from him and listened to everything. Wendell's wife, Kachura, sat at the counter pretending to read something on her phone. She was listening too. "Do you have proof?" Wendell asked. "I have everything," Daniel said. "Original files, patent application, the timeline, a copy of their board deck with my exact language in it, phrases I invented that don't exist anywhere else." "Then you're not finished," Wendell said. "You haven't even started." Daniel looked at his hands. "You've been letting people treat you like you're in the way," Wendell said. "Not harshly, precisely, like you're extra." "Daniel, you were never extra. You hear me?" Daniel nodded but said nothing. "Because here's the truth about having your work stolen and your name erased and your body mocked in front of 40 people. It doesn't just make you angry. It rearranges something, moves the furniture around inside you, makes you question not just the people who did it but yourself, why you trusted them, what you missed, whether some buried part of you believed you deserved it." That question was sitting in his chest on the drive back to Cambridge. And that's when Alicia texted him. Alicia Drummond had been his girlfriend for 14 months. Precise, organized, every word chosen carefully. Daniel had believed, in the way people believe things they need to be true, that her steadiness meant she was genuinely on his side. Her text said we should talk. Tonight, he drove to her apartment. She sat on the couch in the posture of someone who had rehearsed. The words came out smooth, no stumbles where real feeling usually hides. "I just think you need to let this go," she said. "Vanessa has connections everywhere. Her investors, her board, her lawyers. You can't fight all of that. And sometimes being realistic means understanding where you stand." "Where do I stand, Alicia?" She looked away first. He drove home. At 11:47 p.m., a mutual connection had liked a photo on LinkedIn. A private rooftop dinner in the Seaport District. Alicia, and next to her, arm comfortable around her shoulder, smiling the smile of a man who had recently gotten everything he wanted. Vincent Lau, Meridian's vice president of product strategy. The man who sat 2 offices from Raymond Cho. The man with access to every research file moving through engineering. The man who had been in that boardroom. The photo was dated 6 weeks ago, when Daniel's files were sitting in Raymond's shared drive. He closed the laptop, sat in the dark, and something shifted inside Daniel Pruitt. Not with noise, not with drama. The way a river changes course underground. Slow, complete, permanent, and without any announcement. He opened a new browser window. He typed the name of the one company Vanessa Hart had described in 2 separate public interviews as her greatest competitive threat. Arrowwood Systems, Austin, Texas. He wrote a short email to the founder, a man named Broderick Osei, whom he had never met, and said only, "I have something you need to see." He hit send, packed a bag, took the first flight to Austin, and by the time Vanessa Hart arrived at her office that Monday morning, the most valuable engineer she had ever employed was sitting across a table from her biggest rival. What happened in that Austin conference room would take everything Daniel had, and nearly take Daniel himself. Austin, Texas smells different from Boston. Less salt, more heat. The kind of air that settles on your skin like a decision you haven't made yet. Daniel Pruitt walked into the lobby of Arrowwood Systems on a Tuesday morning, wearing the same clothes he'd packed at midnight. He hadn't slept on the plane, hadn't eaten since Wendell's kitchen table 2 days ago. His eyes were dry, his jaw was tight, and he carried the specific stillness of a man who has run completely out of patience for his own suffering and has decided, quietly and without ceremony, to do something about it instead. The receptionist, a young woman named Greta with paint-stained nails and genuinely warm eyes, offered him coffee twice. He declined both times. Then Broderick Osei walked through the glass doors, shorter than Daniel expected, mid-50s, natural gray at his temples, plain gray t-shirt, dark jeans, no watch, no cufflinks, no framed senator photo anywhere in sight. He shook Daniel's hand the way people shake hands when they actually mean it. Firm, brief, direct eye contact. Daniel Pruitt. Broderick said, "I read your patent application last night. Both submissions. Twice." He paused. "Why are you here instead of courtroom?" "Because a courtroom takes 3 years," Daniel said, "and I want to build something." Broderick studied him for a moment. "Come on back," he said. They spent 6 hours in that conference room. Broderick's lead attorney, Constance Briley, joined at noon. Close-cropped silver hair, the composed demeanor of someone who had won arguments in rooms far more hostile than this one. She reviewed Daniel's documentation for 90 minutes without saying a single word. Then she looked up. "Your preliminary patent predates their board presentation by 14 months. This phrase, adaptive cascade priority sequencing, does not appear in any prior publication, any patent filing, any engineering literature I can locate anywhere." She set the folder down. "It's yours." They stole from the wrong person. Broderick slid a partnership agreement across the table. Equity stake, fully funded development team, legal support, full public attribution on every product built using Halcyon technology. Daniel looked at the document for a long moment. Then he looked at Broderick. "Why are you doing this?" Not suspiciously, genuinely. Broderick sat back. "Because I've watched Vanessa Hart do this to 3 engineers before you. Every single time. The person she stole from took a settlement, signed an NDA, and disappeared." He paused. "I'm not interested in settlements. I'm interested in correction." Daniel signed the agreement that evening. He called Wendell from the parking lot. Just 2 words. "It's done." Wendell said, "Go get some sleep. The real work starts tomorrow." He didn't sleep. Not that night. Not really for the next 4 months. Because here's what the handshake in the signed agreement and Constance Briley's confidence didn't include: everything that came after it. The Arrowwood engineering team was talented, genuinely talented, but Halcyon in its current form was a prototype, brilliant in concept, unstable under real scale. The first full internal stress test, run 6 weeks into development, failed in the 3rd hour. The thermal routing algorithm collapsed when processing load exceeded a critical threshold, producing a cascade error that wiped 3 test servers and cost Arrowwood $200,000 in equipment. The team lead, a serious young engineer named Waverly Dunn who had transferred from MIT and possessed a particular gift of delivering bad news without flinching, came to Daniel's office at 9 that evening and placed a failure report on his desk without a word. Daniel read every page. How bad, he asked. Bad enough that if this happens in a live client environment, we lose the client and the federal partnership conversation. Waverly said flatly, probably both. Daniel stared at the report. Go home, he said. I'll call you in the morning. He didn't call in the morning. He worked through the night, and the night after that, and most of the one after that, rewriting the load-balancing architecture from the foundational level, which he had always known needed refinement, but had never had the resources to properly address at Meridian. He ate vending machine food, slept in 2-hour stretches on the couch in his office, spoke to almost no one outside of Waverly and the rotating engineers who cycled through in shifts, heads down, working. Broderick checked in on day 3, stood at the office door, looked at the whiteboard buried in equations, looked at Daniel. Do you need anything? Daniel looked up. His eyes were red. Time, he said. You have it, Broderick said, and left without another word. It arrived on a Thursday morning. 47 pages. Filed in federal court in Massachusetts by Foster Webb and 3 outside attorneys Vanessa had retained from a firm in New York that specialized in making smaller opponents bleed slowly. The claim was straightforward and vicious. That Daniel Pruitt had stolen proprietary research materials from Meridian Tech Solutions during his employment, used those materials to develop a competing product, and was in breach of the intellectual property assignment clause in his original employment contract. In other words, they were suing him for stealing his own invention. Constance called Daniel at 8 that morning. I've read it, she said before he could speak. And it's aggressive, it's expensive, and it's designed to do exactly one thing. Delay your launch long enough for Meridian's version to reach the market first. She paused. They know your patent is stronger, so they're attacking the process instead of the product. Can they win? A silence that lasted just long enough to mean something. If we don't fight correctly, they don't need to win in court. They just need to drain you. Daniel sat with that. How much? Constance gave him a number. He didn't react outwardly, but inside, something went cold and specific. The particular fear of a man who grew up in a space between not poor and not comfortable, who knows precisely how fast that space can close and exactly what it looks like when it does. Arrowwood had committed legal support in the partnership agreement, but the lawsuit scope exceeded the original terms. Additional funding required renegotiation. The launch timeline was already under review. 2 of Arrowwood's smaller investors had sent careful emails asking about litigation exposure, the kind of corporate language that means we are thinking about leaving. Broderick called Daniel that afternoon. We're not walking away, he said. I need you to hear that clearly, but I also need you to be honest with me about where your head is. My head is fine, Daniel said. Daniel, a long pause. I'm scared, Daniel said. I'm genuinely scared. Good, Broderick said. That means you're paying attention. Come to dinner tonight. Bring everything. We'll work out the next step together. Back in Boston, Vanessa was running on 4 hours of sleep and the kind of discipline that looks like confidence on the outside, but feels like gripping a ledge from the inside. She moved through the office with the same precision, same blazers, same calibrated authority in every room she entered. Her investor calls were smooth. Her board updates were spotless. But at night, in her apartment in the Back Bay with the city lights smearing across the window, she sat at her kitchen table with a glass of wine she rarely finished and a silence that had recently grown teeth. She had built something real at Meridian. She knew that. The federal contracts. Hers. The revenue growth. Hers. The culture of performance that made the company function at the level it did. She had built that from genuine disorder, and she had not slept through a single step of it. But she had also built something else, something smaller and darker that lived in the shadow of every achievement, a pattern of taking what wasn't offered and calling it leadership, a habit of erasing the people who made her look brilliant, so that brilliant was all anyone saw. She thought about the photograph, sometimes, the one sitting in the storage unit box. 26 years old, ponytail, laughing at a whiteboard in San Francisco. She didn't know exactly when the laughter had stopped. She only knew it had, and that some night she sat at this table and couldn't fully remember what had replaced it. She picked up her phone and called Raymond. He answered on the second ring, because not answering Vanessa was not an option he had possessed in a long time. The lawsuit needs a hold, she said. Whatever Foster needs, give it to him. Vanessa, Raymond, silence. Okay, he said. She hung up, poured the wine down the sink, went to bed, did not sleep. The lawsuit did what lawsuits designed to drain people always do. It drained. 3 months of depositions, document requests, motions, counter-motions. Constance fought every single inch with the controlled intensity of someone who had been waiting for exactly this fight. But legal fees accumulated regardless of who was winning the arguments, and Daniel watched the numbers with the anxiety of a man who understood precisely what running out meant. He called Wendell on a Sunday night in month 3. I might have made a mistake, he said. What kind? The kind where I thought I could see the whole board, and I only saw half of it. He paused. They have more money than I do, and they're willing to spend it just to slow me down. They don't need to win. They just need me to run out first. Wendell was quiet for a long moment. Are you out? He asked. No. Then you haven't made a mistake yet. You're just in the middle. The middle always feels like losing. That doesn't mean it is. Daniel held on to that sentence for the next 3 weeks, like it was load-bearing. The breakthrough came from a direction nobody saw coming. His name was Garrison Vale, Vanessa's personal corporate attorney. 15 years at her side. He knew the location of every legal skeleton in Meridian's history because he had helped place most of them there. He had drafted the forged ownership documents. He had been in the room for every significant decision Vanessa had made, the ones that made the company and the ones that were slowly unmaking it. He was also Broderick Osei's brother-in-law. That relationship had stayed private for years, too clean a conflict of interest to expose while it served no one. But for the last 9 months, Garrison had been doing something that kept him awake at 2 in the morning more reliably than any lawsuit. Watching a woman he had served faithfully dismantle herself with decisions he had warned her against, using legal architecture he had helped her construct. He called Broderick on a Wednesday evening. I need to speak to your attorney, he said. Broderick didn't ask why. I'll set it up for tomorrow. What Garrison delivered to Constance Briley was meticulous. 9 months of copied internal documents. Files showing the pattern across not just Daniel's project, but 2 previous engineers whose work had been absorbed upward and attributed to Vanessa. Internal communications detailing the strategy. And 2 phone recordings made during calls conducted while Garrison was traveling in Texas, where single-party consent applied, in which Vanessa and Foster Webb discussed the forged ownership records with a frankness that a prosecutor would later describe as remarkably self-incriminating. Constance read through the full package without speaking. Then she looked across the table at Daniel. They just lost their lawsuit, she said quietly. They don't know it yet, but they did. 3 days before Constance filed Garrison's package in court, Daniel's phone rang from a number he didn't recognize. He almost let it go. He was exhausted, mid-litigation, running on 4 hours of sleep, and particular fuel a man who has nothing left to lose except the one thing he is fighting for. He answered, Daniel. The voice was rough, tired in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. It's Raymond. The silence that followed was one of the longest Daniel had ever sat inside. I need to tell you something, Raymond said, and I need you to let me say all of it before you hang up. Daniel said nothing, but he stayed on the line. Raymond talked for 11 minutes. He described Vanessa's office, the falsified performance review sitting on her desk. 30 seconds of silence before she explained what being useful meant. He described what it felt like to carry that. Not with defiance, not with greed, but with the quiet, defeated compliance of a man who had compromised small things for so long that one large thing felt like just another step down a staircase he hadn't noticed he was descending. I didn't do it for money, Raymond said. I didn't do it because I stopped believing in what you built. His voice fractured slightly. I did it because I was afraid of her. And I kept telling myself that made it different somehow. A pause. It doesn't. Daniel looked at the wall of his Austin office. I resigned, Raymond said. I gave the board a written statement with everything I know. I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed you to know that what happened to you was not what I wanted. And that I am genuinely sorry, Daniel. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. I hear you, Raymond. He said finally, "Not it's okay. Not I forgive you. Not anything that cost more than he had to give in that moment. Just, I hear you." He hung up, sat back in his chair, and let out a breath that went all the way down to the floor of his lungs. The kind of exhale that only happens when you've been holding something for a very long time and have finally decided to put it down. Constance filed Garrison's package in federal court on a Tuesday. By Thursday, Foster Webb had withdrawn as Meridian's counsel without explanation. By Friday, 2 outside attorneys had followed. The lawsuit was voluntarily dismissed the following Monday morning, and Meridian's public statement was so carefully worded, so precisely emptied of any admission, that it said everything by saying absolutely nothing. Investors noticed immediately. Arrowwood launched Halcyon 4 months later. The press release credited one inventor by name, Daniel R. Pruitt, lead engineer and co-founder of the Halcyon initiative. The industry press went quiet for 48 hours. The kind of quiet that precedes something very loud. Then the reviews landed. Then the adoption numbers. Then 3 independent university engineering analyses confirming what the market was already showing. 62% reduction in data center energy consumption, consistent across facility types, scalable, patent protected, and unassailable. In the first quarter after launch, Arrowwood's revenue grew by $230 million. In the second quarter, it doubled. By month 18, 340 enterprise clients, including several who had been in preliminary conversations with Meridian about this exact technology, and who had quietly stepped away from Vanessa's table after reading the patent attribution and doing the math. Meridian's internal version launched 6 months after Halcyon Core. It underperformed on every single metric, because what Vanessa had stolen was the prototype. What Daniel had given Arrowwood was everything that came after: 300 hours of revision, a rebuilt architecture, the refinements that only exist when someone is working on something that genuinely belongs to them. You can steal a document. You cannot steal the person who wrote it. On a Wednesday afternoon in March, a message request appeared on Daniel's phone from a name he recognized immediately: Alicia Drummond. He hadn't heard from her since the night. He sat in the dark and found that photograph on LinkedIn. 14 months ago, a different version of his life. He opened it. I saw the press coverage. It said, and the magazine feature. "I just want to say, I always knew you were capable of something like this. I'm genuinely happy for you." He read it twice. Then he read what wasn't written, the part living between every word. "I made a mistake. I chose the wrong side. I want you to know I see that now." He set the phone down, picked it back up, typed, "Thank you, Alicia. I hope you're well." Sent it, closed the conversation, and sat with the quiet surprise of discovering that there was nothing left in him where the hurt used to live. Not because he had forced it out, but because somewhere in the last 14 months of building and fighting, and almost losing and building again, he had simply run out of space to store it. Some doors don't need slamming. They just close. In Boston, Meridian stock began falling. Small losses first, attributed to market conditions, explained away in investor calls by Vanessa Hart, whose voice still commanded rooms, but now carried something underneath it, a frequency that people who listened carefully could identify as calculation covering fear. Then a technology journalist named Paulette Hines, who covered IP litigation with the persistence of someone constitutionally incapable of leaving a loose thread alone, filed a Freedom of Information request on Meridian's patent application, and compared submission dates against public records of Daniel's preliminary filing. The dates didn't match. She published her findings on a Thursday morning. By Friday, Meridian stock had dropped 11%. By Monday, 3 board members had requested an emergency session. Employees were leaving. Not in a flood, in a trickle, the way people exit a building when they smell something that hasn't yet become smoke, but will. Raymond Cho's resignation letter, now in the board's possession, contained details that made 3 executives reach for their personal attorneys before the weekend. Vincent Lau stopped returning calls entirely, and Vanessa Hart sat alone on the 22nd floor in the corner office with the city view and looked out at a Boston skyline that had, until very recently, felt entirely like hers. She opened the drawer of her desk. Inside, under a stack of contracts, was a printed copy of the quarterly projections from 2 years ago. The ones she had stood in front of the board and delivered with complete authority. The ones that had made her look untouchable. She remembered who had built the model behind those projections. His name was on none of the slides. She closed a drawer. An anonymous investor had been quietly purchasing significant blocks of Meridian stock for 11 weeks. Nobody on the board knew who it was. The purchases were structured carefully, spread across multiple holding entities, timed to stay below reporting thresholds, assembled with the patience of someone who understood exactly how these things worked and had both the resources and the legal counsel to do it correctly. Vanessa had tasked 2 people with identifying the buyer. Neither of them found anything. The emergency board meeting was called for a Monday morning. Vanessa spent the weekend preparing. Crisis communications firm on retainer. 2 personal attorneys briefed. A restructuring proposal ready. A public statement drafted. She had a narrative. She had always had a narrative. She was going to walk into that room and take control of it the way she had taken control of every room for the last 15 years. She walked in. The room was already full. Every board member present. 3 attorneys she didn't recognize seated along the wall. Constance Briley at the far end of the table with a leather folder and an expression of total professional stillness. And in the chair at the center of the table, the chair that faced the door, that caught the full light of the morning window, the chair that Vanessa Hart had occupied for 5 years, Daniel Pruitt, navy suit, no tie, same glasses he had always worn. His hands were flat on the table, and his expression was the expression of a man who had done the work and was here to confirm the result. Nothing performed, nothing wasted, nothing extra. The room was completely silent. In that silence, Vanessa Hart felt, for the first time in a very long time, the specific sensation of a room that was no longer hers. "Good morning, Vanessa," Daniel said. The board chair, Ellsworth Prudhomme, gray-haired, 60 years of boardroom behind him, the exhausted patience to prove it, spoke next. "Ms. Hart, the board has reviewed all documentation, the original patent filing, the assignment records, the internal communications." He paused. "The recordings." Her attorney moved to speak. Ellsworth raised one hand. "The vote has already been taken. The decision is final." He looked directly at her. "You are removed as CEO of Meridian Tech Solutions, effective immediately." She didn't collapse. "Give her that." She stood straight, jaw tight. She looked at the table, then at the ceiling, then, in the moment that everyone in that room would carry with them for years, at Daniel. He held her eyes. He didn't smile. Everyone expected Daniel to speak, to reclaim the moment loudly, publicly, in the way the moment seemed to demand. He had been laughed at in this building by 40 people. His work had been stolen, his name erased, his girlfriend reporting his movements to the man who engineered the theft. He had been walked out of this building with a cardboard box, while employees watched from the windows above, and not one of them came down. He had earned the right to say something that would land like a verdict. Instead, he asked Ellsworth for 10 minutes. He stood. He named, individually by name, clearly, the 3 engineers in the analytics department who had protected their original project documentation after Daniel's termination and quietly preserved a record of what was real. He said their names so the room would know them. He addressed all staff through the internal broadcast feed directly. He told them the company's failures were not their fault. He told them the coming months will require hard decisions, but that every decision will be made with honest workers at the center of it. He promoted Priya Osei to Chief Marketing Officer on the spot. The woman who had pressed her hand against a third-floor window the day security walked Daniel out, who had looked at the table during the conference room joke, who had never laughed, who had carried that weight in silence for 2 years, sat in the all-staff broadcast room and put both hands over her mouth. Then Daniel turned to Vanessa. She was still standing, her 2 attorneys flanking her, the room dissolving around her into quiet conversations and gathering papers. "You're receiving a full severance package," Daniel said. 6 months. Healthcare. A reference letter describing your genuine business accomplishments because they're real and they belong to you. He paused. "Your car is in the lot. Your personal items will be packed and sent. You can leave through the front door." She stared at him. "That's it." Her voice was barely there. "That's it," he said. He picked up his folder. The meeting was ending. Attorneys were moving. Board members were already in quiet conversations at the edges of the room. But Vanessa didn't move. And then she said something. Not for the room. Not for the record. Just for him, barely above a whisper, in the space between what was finished and what she would carry forward. The biggest mistake I ever made wasn't stealing your invention. Daniel stopped. She looked at the table. Then back at him. Something had come loose beneath the armor, visible for just a moment. The way a light shows briefly under a door before someone closes it. It was believing your appearance defined your worth. He held that for a moment. Then he said quietly, I know that was always your problem, not mine. He walked out. 3 months later, Daniel had the 22nd floor conference room renovated. He took down the glass walls, put in solid walls with real doors that close. He hung one framed piece of text at the entrance. Not a famous quote, not a corporate value statement. A sentence he wrote himself, in his own handwriting, printed and mounted in plain wood. What you build in silence will speak for you when the room gets loud. Elliot Crane, the nervous assistant who had hidden behind his tablet, turned out to be a gifted operations coordinator. Daniel kept him on, gave him a title that matched what he had actually been doing for years. Otis Farley, who had left Meridian 2 years earlier because something in the innovation pipeline hadn't smelled right, came back. Greta, the receptionist in Austin with the paint-stained nails who had offered Daniel coffee twice on the worst morning of his professional life, received a handwritten note from him 6 months later. She framed it. Broderick, Osei, and Daniel still have lunch when Broderick is in Boston. They talk about their fathers. They talk about the gap between what people see when they look at you and what you actually are. And Raymond Cho. Raymond spent 8 months out of work, lost the VP title, the equity, the industry reputation he had built over 20 years. He took a position eventually at a small engineering firm in Providence. Mid-level. No office. No direct reports. He showed up every day and did the work quietly and didn't ask for anything that hadn't been offered. Daniel heard about it through a mutual contact. He didn't reach out, but he didn't wish him badly either. Some things don't end with forgiveness. They just end. And sometimes that's the most honest conclusion available to both people. As for Vanessa Hart, she took the severance, left through the front door, spent 8 months entirely out of the industry, which the press read as disgrace, but which she would later describe, in a private conversation that found its way back to Broderick eventually. As the first time in 15 years, she has slept past 6 in the morning without an alarm. She started a small consulting practice. No press, no profile. She works with early-stage founders now. Young ones, nervous ones, the kind who arrive with enormous ideas and almost no confidence. People who know her say she is genuinely good at it. Some people change when the cost finally matches the lesson. Not all, but some. The man they laughed at became the leader they never deserved. And the most powerful thing he did, more powerful than the patent, more powerful than the boardroom, more powerful than buying the company from underneath the woman who stole from him, was walking out of that room without burning it down. Because anyone can destroy something. It takes a completely different kind of person to build something better in its place. And that is the story of Daniel Pruitt, the man they laughed at, the man they stole from, the man who walked back into that boardroom, not to burn it down, but to build something better inside it. If this story hit you somewhere real, hit that like button right now. Share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. And drop a comment. What was the moment in this story that got you the most? Was it Raymond's phone call? Alicia's message? Or the moment Daniel walked through that boardroom door? Tell me below. I read every single one.